Hello, this is Tim Larkin, and I'm here with your personal safety tip. Today we're going to be exploring the chaos of real violence. When we look at violence, there's all sorts of definitions people have, and I think, first of all, we need to look at the predator, the perpetrator of the violence that you'll be dealing with. We have to make a couple of base assumptions. The first assumption is that your attacker will always be bigger, faster, and stronger. That's just a baseline. They don't go looking for fights. And so they're going to pick somebody that they believe they can easily dominate. We also have to assume that they're going to be carrying weapons. It would be foolish for us to think that the person is not going to have a weapon on them, because there are so many different outliers when it comes to violence. We might as well assume worst case scenario. And further looking at the situation, we might as well make the next assumption. There's always going to be more than one. So if we start out with this assumption and everything that we look at on how to deal with violence, and we assume that the predator is always going to be bigger, faster, and stronger, that they will carry weapons, and that he's going to have his friends, more than one, then we can start to have a better understanding of what we're dealing with and what we prepare for and how would we train for that. Now what we need to do is we need to define the real threat. What is the real threat to us as sane, socialized individuals? The question really is, what is an act of asocial violence? Because asocial violence is the one thing that we as sane socialized individuals cannot avoid if it comes our way. And so a good definition of that is, it is an imminent act of violence devoid of choice. Now, meaning you have no choice in whether you'll participate in the event, and it will occur regardless of your health, age, or disability. So at this point, I think it's going to be instructive for us to actually take a look at an act of asocial violence. So I've entitled this one ATM After Dark, and I'll walk you through it. Here you see a woman going up to the ATM. Obviously it's nighttime, you can see the lights are on. Looks like her husband coming up behind her, and they're having a typical night, grabbing some cash at the ATM. Now, I've stopped the video here because at this point, let's think, these folks obviously are very comfortable doing this. They feel safe at this stage of the game, and they've probably done this numerous times. So they felt it was okay. Now, I'm sure they've heard, as we all have, that your risk for attack goes significantly up anytime after dark you go to an ATM. But because they've been successful in the past, they feel that tonight's going to be no different. But this is the equivalent of them on numerous occasions sleeping with their head on a railroad track. All the other times the train hasn't come, but tonight the train's going to come. Let's see what happens. You see some movement in the back, and then the blitzkrieg attack. The attackers separate each one of them, knock them to the ground, grabbing the wallet that they want. You'll notice the woman's getting the worst of it. She probably fought harder to keep her things, and it's over. That is an act of asocial violence, and the reason it's good to have a visual is so that you understand exactly what you're dealing with when we go through this series of videos. Let's look at some of the takeaways. What do we know? Well, we know this about asocial violence. You can't opt out. Those two people that went to the ATM, once the attack was in, they had no way of talking their way out of it. They had no ability to stop the act. They had to participate in it. It wasn't a choice at that point. So that's a very important thing to distinguish in an act of asocial violence, is that it's devoid of choice. The next thing is that we have to understand, and this is something that really hits home with a lot of people, is that no one gets a pass. You'll notice both of those people were older. The gentleman looked like he had a limp. They didn't look like they were both in particularly good shape. So they were fairly easy targets, quote unquote, to the two young guys that came in and attacked them. Nothing stopped those two young guys from saying, oh, this person looks like he's disabled. They look overweight. They don't look very strong. No, those were all reasons that they perpetrated the attack. So if you're out there thinking, well, I can't learn anything about personal safety or self-protection because of my bad hip, because of my bad knees, because of my age, because of my health. Unfortunately, the predators ignore that. So that's something to think about, and that's what that video really showed. And the last thing I want you to take away from this is, In a situation like you just saw, really your first line of defense is your brain and your body. Even if those two individuals, say, had firearms on them, that attack was such a blindsided attack, such a quick attack, that they were quickly overwhelmed. And if they had been focused on trying to get a firearm even, they would have been just as unsuccessful. So what to think about in the future as we go through this and defining these acts is the fact that if I have my brain and my body, maybe there are things I need to learn about how to inflict injury on somebody. And that's really the only way that we can look at possibly dealing with asocial violence. So as we go forward with this, I'll be exploring more of the idea of dealing with asocial violence and giving you an idea of what tools are available to you that you may not see, you may not know. You may think a situation like this was inevitable if those two people had no ability to protect themselves for whatever excuse is in your head, and that's just not true. It's Tim Larkin, Target Focus Training.